The celestial accord drifted silently through the vastness of space. Its sleek, silver hull reflected the distant stars as it made its way toward the newly established meeting point for the galactic concord. For humanity, this moment was monumental. An official meeting with representatives from dozens of alien civilizations, each more advanced and ancient than Earth could ever imagine. Earth's official ambassador, David Carter, sat nervously in the ambassadorial chamber. He had met diplomats from several alien races during previous exchanges, but this was different. Today was his first meeting with Princess Xyra, the heir to the throne of the Zorvani Dominion, a species known for their sharp intellect and fierce pride. Ambassador Carter had spent months preparing for this meeting. He had learned the proper greetings, the cultural nuances, and even the delicate balance of humor that the Zorvani appreciated. But when he first laid eyes on Princess Xyra, he felt a sudden weight of uncertainty. She was tall, with an elegant posture, her long silver hair cascading down like a river of light. Her eyes glowed with an otherworldly sheen, reflecting the stars as if they held centuries of knowledge in them. She sat gracefully across the table, an aura of power and curiosity surrounding her. Yet there was something about her presence that made David feel both intimidated and intrigued. The meeting began with formalities, as expected. They spoke about the future of intergalactic relations, trade agreements, and scientific exchange. But it didn't take long for Princess Xyra to lean forward, her eyes narrowing as if she were sizing up the human ambassador. She asked questions that had David pausing for a moment, not out of difficulty, but because they were questions of the heart, of what made humanity unique. At one point, the topic shifted to biological differences. Princess Xyra, in her curiosity, asked, "Tell me, Ambassador Carter, how does your species handle reproduction? Surely it must be a seasonal event, like many of the other species in the galaxy." David blinked, not expecting this topic to come up, especially so early in the meeting. But the question was not offensive. It was simply a product of cultural misunderstanding. Many alien species, after all, had reproduction cycles tied to certain seasons or planets' climates. The Zorvani, for example, could only reproduce during specific celestial alignments, a rare event that happened once every 50 years. So the idea of humans being able to reproduce at any time of year seemed almost impossible to them. Actually, David began, clearing his throat. Humans don't exactly follow any kind of seasonal cycle. Our biology allows us to mate year-round, whenever we choose. There was a brief pause. Princess Xyra's eyes narrowed slightly, her expression unreadable. "You mean to say humans can mate at any time of the year? That doesn't make sense. I have studied other species. Your biology should limit this ability. You claim your species does not experience seasonal reproductive patterns, yet your planet's climate, its biology, it is all so diverse. How could that be possible?" David realized that he had made an error in judgment. The question, meant as a simple point of curiosity, had become a matter of challenge. He smiled awkwardly, trying to salvage the conversation. "Well, you see, human biology is." Before he could finish, Princess Xyra interrupted. "Then prove it." The words hung in the air like a challenge, a gauntlet thrown without hesitation. The other delegates, a mix of alien species from different corners of the galaxy, watched the exchange with wide eyes. They were all familiar with the Zorvani way, prideful, unyielding, and always looking for ways to test the limits of others. This was no different. "Prove it," David repeated, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "How would we?" "You must prove that humans are capable of mating year-round," Princess Xyra insisted. "I demand that you demonstrate it." The room fell silent. David's heart raced. He knew the Zorvani were known for their boldness, but this was something entirely new. This wasn't a simple question. It was an outright demand for evidence. The princess wasn't satisfied with words or explanations. She wanted proof, something concrete that could convince her of the veracity of his claim. David's mind raced. He had to think quickly. This was a matter of diplomacy, and failure to meet this demand could jeopardize all human relations with the Galactic Concord. But how could he possibly prove something so deeply personal, something so tied to the biology of an entire species? The silence in the room stretched on, and David found himself grasping for an answer. "Perhaps we could arrange a demonstration, Your Highness," he suggested, hoping he didn't sound too desperate. "An observational program. It could involve volunteers from Earth, participating in a cultural exchange where they live on your planet and demonstrate human biological patterns. A year-long study." The princess leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. The other delegates exchanged whispers, clearly intrigued by the proposal. Finally, after a moment of heavy contemplation, Princess Zyra nodded slowly. "Very well," she said. "I shall accept this demonstration. But know this, Ambassador. Failure to provide satisfactory proof will be considered an insult to the Zorvani people." David nodded, his mind still spinning from the unexpected turn of events. As he left the room, he felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. The diplomatic meeting had just taken a drastic turn, and the road ahead was far more uncertain than he had ever imagined. The day after the shocking demand from Princess Zyra, Ambassador David Carter found himself in the quiet, sterile environment of the United Nations Space Council's research lab. His mind was still reeling from the earlier exchange. How could he possibly prove something so personal and complicated as human reproduction to an entire galaxy of alien species? It wasn't something he could just demonstrate like some sort of science experiment. As he sat at the table, staring at the reports and data spread in front of him, he sighed deeply. The human race had long since mastered space travel, achieved peace on Earth, and even made remarkable strides in scientific research. But now, standing on the edge of becoming a true member of the Galactic Concord, humanity had been thrust into a situation none of their textbooks or diplomatic strategies had prepared them for. "Ambassador Carter," a voice called, breaking his thoughts. Dr. Evelyn Torres, the chief xenobiologist for Earth's diplomatic mission, entered the room. She was tall, with dark brown hair pulled back into a neat bun and a sharp, calculating gaze. Her reputation for solving some of the most complicated biological puzzles in the galaxy was well known, and now, it was time for her to step in and help with the impossible. "Dr. Torres," David greeted, standing up. "I need your help. I'm not sure how we're going to pull this off, but we need to show the Zorvani that humans can mate year-round. That's the only way to keep this diplomatic mission from falling apart." Dr. Torres gave him a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, Ambassador. We'll find a way. Let's start by reviewing the science." She sat across from him and began laying out the charts and graphs that outlined human reproductive biology. David couldn't help but feel a little awkward as she explained the details in her precise, scientific way. "Humans don't have the biological restrictions many other species face," she said, pointing to one of the slides on the screen. "For us, the reproductive cycle is more flexible. It's governed by hormonal changes, not seasonal patterns, and unlike species that can only mate during certain times of the year, humans have the ability to reproduce at any time." David nodded, trying to absorb the information. He had always known about the basics of human biology, of course, but now it felt strange to discuss it in such technical terms, especially with an alien species watching from the sidelines. "Okay," David said slowly. "So, the science checks out. But how do we convince the Zorvani? The princess wants more than just data. She wants proof. Something real." Dr. Torres thought for a moment, tapping her finger against the table. "What if we arranged for volunteers to participate in a living study? It would show the Zorvani that human biology is naturally adaptable. We could have a group of humans living on Zorvani soil, going about their daily lives, and their natural biological cycles would be observed." David's eyes widened. "You mean like a year-long cultural exchange?" "Yes, exactly. The volunteers would live in a specially designed habitat on Zorvani, monitored by the princess's people. We could also arrange for medical professionals to ensure that everything is accurate and scientifically sound. David ran his hand through his hair, the weight of the situation beginning to settle in. That could work, but we'll need more than just a few volunteers. We need to find people who can handle the stress of being observed constantly. This isn't just a biological experiment. It's a cultural test, too. I agree, Dr. Torres said. And it's not just about biology. The Zorvani are also interested in how humans interact with each other. This isn't just about reproduction. It's about relationships. We need to show them how humans form bonds, friendships, and emotional connections, too. David thought about it for a moment. He had read about the Zorvani's advanced understanding of biology, but their emotional intelligence and social dynamics were vastly different from humanity's. To them, relationships were largely practical, functional. To humans, relationships were deeply emotional, complex, and varied. He wondered how the Zorvani would react to that. We'll need to find people who can not only demonstrate their biological cycles, but also show the Zorvani what it means to truly connect with others, David said slowly. This could turn into something more than just a scientific study. It could be a cultural exchange, too, something that could change how the Zorvani view humanity. I agree, Dr. Torres said, her voice calm and steady. And we'll need to make sure the volunteers are carefully selected. They'll need to be mentally and emotionally strong, especially since they'll be under constant observation. We can't afford any missteps. David nodded, feeling a sense of determination rising in him. All right, I'll work on finding the right people. We need to make this work, for humanity's sake. With that, the planning began in earnest. Over the next few weeks, teams of scientists, diplomats, and medical professionals worked together to create a detailed plan for the cultural exchange. Volunteers were carefully chosen from a diverse pool of candidates, people who had a deep understanding of what it meant to be human, and who could withstand the pressure of living under the eyes of a galaxy full of curious onlookers. As the time drew closer for the volunteers to depart for the Zorvani homeworld, the stakes became even higher. Not only would they be demonstrating the truth of human biology, but they would also be showing the universe something much deeper. They would be showing what it truly meant to be human, what it meant to love, to struggle, and to form connections that transcended anything biological or scientific. And as David watched the volunteers prepare, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of impact this exchange would have on the future of humanity's place in the stars. The Celestial Accord was now on its way to Zorvani, carrying the team of human volunteers who would soon participate in the unprecedented cultural exchange program. As the ship drifted through the stars, Ambassador David Carter paced the deck, lost in thought. He had been present at every stage of the planning. And now, with the volunteers ready for the mission, he couldn't shake the feeling that something huge was about to unfold. This wasn't just about biology anymore. It was about proving that humanity had a place in the galaxy, showing that human connections, emotions, and relationships were just as valuable as any scientific discovery. Inside the sleek, metallic halls of the ship, the 4 volunteers sat in their quarters, preparing for the mission ahead. There was Marcus, a cheerful but thoughtful high school teacher from California, who had always been fascinated by the stars. Lena, a quiet but passionate artist from France, known for her ability to create powerful emotions with her paintings. Sam, a friendly and empathetic nurse from New Zealand, who always made everyone feel at ease with his calming presence. And Priya, a driven and intelligent software engineer from India, who saw the world as a series of complex puzzles, always searching for the underlying patterns of life. They all had one thing in common. Each of them had agreed to be part of this cultural experiment for the good of humanity, but none of them truly knew what they were in for. The Celestial Accord arrived at the Zorvani homeworld just days later, a massive, sprawling planet covered in silver forests and cities made of glass-like materials that shimmered in the light of their 2 suns. The Zorvani government had prepared a special facility for the humans, a sprawling habitat with all the necessary resources, designed to mimic the comforts of Earth, while still giving them the opportunity to live and work among the Zorvani. The volunteers would be observed by both human and Zorvani scientists, as well as by Princess Zyra herself, who had made it clear that she would be watching their every move. The first few days in the habitat were filled with a sense of unease. The volunteers had no idea what to expect, and every moment felt like a strange balancing act. They tried to go about their lives as normal, but the knowledge that they were being watched by cameras, sensors, and curious alien eyes was impossible to ignore. It didn't take long before the Zorvani set up an array of cameras around the habitat, broadcasting the volunteers' daily activities to the entire galaxy. What had started as a scientific study had quickly transformed into something else, a sort of galactic reality show. Alien species from all corners of the galaxy tuned in, fascinated by the idea of observing humans up close. The Zorvani media outlets covered every moment, turning the volunteers into stars, with their every word and action scrutinized by millions of viewers. At first, the volunteers felt the weight of the cameras, the constant feeling of being watched. They tried to maintain their privacy, but it wasn't easy when their conversations and daily routines were being broadcast to an entire galaxy. There were moments of awkwardness, like when Sam tried to make pancakes for breakfast and accidentally burned them, or when Lena had to explain to a curious alien why humans don't usually paint with their feet. But in a strange way, the volunteers began to realize that the Zorvani were not only observing them out of scientific curiosity, but also out of genuine interest in how humans lived. Princess Zyra visited the habitat frequently, often arriving unannounced, her silver hair gleaming under the bright light of the twin suns. She would sit with the volunteers, her sharp eyes observing their interactions. At first, her presence felt imposing, like she was testing them to see if they were worthy of the Zorvani's respect. But over time, the volunteers began to notice a subtle shift in her demeanor. She no longer only asked about the biological aspects of human life. She began to ask about emotions, about love, about friendship. One afternoon, after a long day of being observed, Marcus sat with Priya on the balcony of the habitat, watching the twin suns set over the silver forests. It was a peaceful moment, one of the few where they could forget the cameras and simply enjoy the beauty of the moment. But as always, the silence was interrupted by a soft voice. "Ambassador Carter," Princess Zyra called, stepping onto the balcony. She was accompanied by a few Zorvani aides, who quietly observed from the background. "Princess," Marcus greeted, standing up and offering a polite bow. "What brings you here today?" "I was curious about your connection to the land," Princess Zyra said, her glowing eyes focused on the horizon. "You humans speak of nature, of the beauty in your world. But what does it truly mean to you?" Marcus hesitated, unsure of how to answer. "Well, to us, nature is something we're deeply connected to. It's not just about the trees or the sky. It's about the way those things make us feel. It's about finding a sense of peace and belonging, even in a busy world." Princess Zyra seemed to ponder this for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Interesting," she murmured. "Where I come from, we see nature as something to be controlled, to be molded for efficiency. But what you speak of, it sounds like a different way of living." Lena, who had joined the conversation, spoke up. "For us, it's not just about control. It's about harmony. We try to live in balance with nature, not just dominate it. It's a part of who we are." Princess Zyra nodded slowly. "Perhaps this is something I can learn from you." The conversation continued, and as the days went by, the volunteers found themselves not only educating the Zorvani about human biology, but also about the deeper aspects of human life. They shared stories of love, of hardship, of joy, and of dreams. The Zorvani began to realize that humans were not simply a species driven by biology or survival. They were a species driven by connection, by emotions, by the unexplainable bonds that tied them together. It was clear now that this experiment was about more than just proving a point. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity had something unique to offer, a rich, complex culture that could touch the hearts and minds of even the most advanced civilizations. And for the first time since they arrived, the volunteers felt they were more than just specimens under observation. They were ambassadors for their entire species. The Zorveni homeworld was nothing like Earth. The twin suns, shining brightly in the sky, gave everything a strange, otherworldly glow. The air smelled slightly metallic, a reminder that they were far from home. Yet, as the volunteers spent more time in the carefully crafted habitat, they began to adapt. At first, the adjustment had been difficult. The constant presence of cameras and sensors made even the simplest activities feel like a performance. Marcus had found it hard to relax, always aware of the watchful eyes of the galaxy. Lena struggled with the idea that her every move was being broadcast. But over time, they had found small comforts, laughter, quiet moments of solitude, and the familiar sense of teamwork that had brought them together in the first place. The habitat itself was a blend of technology and nature. There were green spaces with plants from Earth, carefully cultivated to remind them of home. There were also areas designed to reflect Zorvani architecture, with sleek metallic walls and wide windows that offered views of the shimmering cities below. It was a strange blend of two worlds, one organic, one technological, but it had become a place where the volunteers could find some peace amidst the constant observation. Sam had become the group's peacemaker. He was a nurse by trade, and his calm demeanor seemed to ease the tension among the volunteers. Whether it was a friendly conversation or a word of encouragement when one of them felt homesick, Sam was always there. He had the unique ability to make people feel at ease, and that helped the team grow closer despite the odd circumstances. Priya, ever the problem solver, had quickly begun to adjust to the new surroundings. She was fascinated by the Zorveni technology and spent hours studying the intricate systems that kept their habitat running smoothly. She even struck up a few conversations with the Zorveni engineers, eager to learn from them. They seemed curious about her too, impressed by her ability to understand their technology, despite the language barriers. Lena, on the other hand, found solace in her art. The Zorvani were fascinated by her paintings, especially the ones that depicted Earth's natural landscapes. They had never seen the world through the eyes of an artist, and the volunteers began to realize just how much humanity had to offer. Lena spent her days painting, capturing moments of beauty in this strange world. Her work was displayed for everyone to see, and the Zorvani delegates often stopped by to ask questions about her techniques and inspiration. But the most difficult part was the emotional strain. Living under constant observation, even with the best intentions, was exhausting. The volunteers weren't just being watched by the Zorvani. They were also being judged by an entire galaxy of species who had no understanding of what it was like to be human. They didn't understand the weight of love, the complexity of relationships, or the way humans could experience joy and sorrow all at once. They only saw humans as creatures with biology that didn't fit into their neatly structured understanding of life. One evening after a long day, the group sat together in the living area, trying to unwind. The cameras were switched off for a short time, a rare moment of privacy. They gathered on the soft cushions around a low table, sharing a simple meal. "So, what do you think the Zorvani are really learning from us?" Priya asked, her voice thoughtful. She had been quiet for a while, contemplating the whole experience. Lena shrugged, brushing her long hair out of her face. "I think they're learning that we're more than just biological machines. They thought we were only about reproduction, about survival. But maybe now they see there's more to us." "I hope so," Sam said, offering a gentle smile. "I think they're starting to realize that humanity isn't just defined by how we reproduce. It's how we live, our connections with each other. I mean, look at us. We've only known each other a few weeks, but we've formed bonds." Marcus nodded in agreement. "We might not be as advanced as the Zorvani, but we have something they don't. Emotions. We feel deeply, and we connect with others in ways they can't even understand yet." Priya raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a small smile. "You know, Marcus, you're sounding a little philosophical there." Marcus laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Maybe. But it's true. The Zorvani think of relationships like contracts. They see everything in terms of efficiency. For humans, though, relationships are messy, unpredictable, but so much richer for it." There was a moment of silence as they all thought about Marcus's words. It was true. The Zorvani viewed everything through a lens of logic and structure, but humanity had always embraced the chaos of emotions: love, fear, joy, and pain. To the Zorvani, these things were often seen as distractions. Yet it was this very chaos that gave life its meaning, something the volunteers knew all too well. The quiet moment was broken by the sudden hum of a Zorvani communicator. Princess Zyra's face appeared on the screen in front of them, her expression serious but not unkind. "Ambassador Carter, I request your presence in the observation chamber," she said, her voice cool but with a hint of curiosity. "There is something I would like to discuss with you and your team." The volunteers exchanged glances. They had grown used to Princess Zyra's occasional visits, but this time her tone seemed different. There was no lecture, no scientific inquiry, just a simple request for conversation. David stood up, his voice calm. "We'll be there shortly, Your Highness." As they made their way to the observation chamber, the volunteers couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The Zorvani had always been curious, always watching. But now, it seemed like the princess might be looking for something deeper, something beyond just biology and science. They wondered what would come next in this strange, ever-evolving exchange between two very different species. And as they walked down the sleek corridors of the habitat, they felt a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't just about proving a point anymore. It was about showing the galaxy the true depth of humanity, its beauty, its complexity, and its unbreakable bond with one another. As the days passed, the atmosphere in the Zorvani habitat grew increasingly tense. Ambassador David Carter couldn't quite put his finger on it, but something had shifted. The volunteers were no longer just the subjects of a scientific study. They had become symbols of something greater, something that could either solidify humanity's place in the galaxy or make the Zorvani question everything they thought they knew about life, relationships, and emotions. It was late one evening when the call came. The volunteers were gathered in their communal space, relaxing after another long day. San was telling a funny story from Earth, making everyone laugh. Priya was tinkering with a Zorvani device she had found in the observation lab. Lena was sketching in her notebook, and Marcus was reading. The comfortable silence was suddenly interrupted by a soft peep. It was a communication from Princess Zyra. "Ambassador Carter, I require your presence immediately," the voice said, clipped and formal. "There is something urgent we must discuss." David looked up from his seat, the smile fading from his face. "We're on our way, Your Highness," he replied, standing up. The volunteers exchanged uneasy glances. It wasn't unusual for the princess to call for them, but the urgency in her tone was different this time. As they walked to the meeting room, they passed the glass walls of the observation chambers. The Zorvani scientists and officials who had been monitoring their every move stood at their stations, silent and observant. The team had grown accustomed to the ever-present eyes of their alien hosts, but tonight it felt more like a weight, pressing on them from all directions. When they entered the chamber, Princess Zyra was already waiting, her silver hair cascading down her back, her expression unreadable. Behind her stood several of her advisors, their faces tense, as if preparing for something momentous. "Ambassador," Princess Zyra began, her voice steady, but carrying a sense of authority. "I have reviewed the data gathered from your group. The biological aspect of this exchange is clear, as is your ability to reproduce at any time. But there is something else I wish to test, something beyond your biology." David's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, Your Highness?" he asked cautiously, sensing the gravity of her words. Princess Zyra's gaze shifted toward the volunteers. Your species claims to form deep emotional bonds, that your relationships are more than mere biological urges, that they are driven by something beyond necessity. I wish to understand that. I wish to see it. The room fell silent as the meaning of her words sank in. This wasn't just about proving that humans could reproduce year-round. It was about proving the strength of their emotions, their connections to one another. It was as if the Zorvani had reached a point where they had no choice but to see if humanity's relationships could withstand the ultimate test. Are you asking us to prove our bonds with one another? Sam asked slowly, his voice calm but laced with concern. Yes, Princess Styra replied, her voice unwavering. I want to see how strong your connections really are. We will be testing your emotional resilience. If you are truly bonded, you will be able to handle the challenges ahead. If not, well, we shall see. A chill ran down the volunteers' spines. They had already been through so much, being watched 24/7, trying to prove their worthiness, and now this. It felt like their bonds of friendship were being tested in a way they had never imagined. David turned to the team, trying to read the expressions on their faces. We don't have a choice, he said, his voice firm. We agreed to this. We need to show the Zorvani that we're more than just our biology. We need to show them that humanity has depth. We're more than just survival. We're about connection, love, trust. The volunteers exchanged looks, each one silently agreeing with David's words. It wasn't just about them anymore. It was about proving humanity's worth to the galaxy. It was about showing the Zorvani that love, friendship, and emotional bonds were just as important as anything else. How will the test be conducted? Priya asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty that lingered in the air. You will be placed in a simulated environment, Princess Zyra explained. It will test your emotional responses to various challenges. You will face situations designed to challenge your bonds, your relationships with each other. How you respond will determine the outcome. Fail, and you will have proven nothing about your claims. Succeed, and we will see the truth of your species. Marcus's face was pale, but he stood tall, determined. We're ready. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. We'll show you that humans are strong, stronger than you think, Lena added, her voice quiet but filled with conviction. Very well, Princess Cyrus said. The test begins tomorrow. Prepare yourselves. As the princess and her advisors left, the room was filled with a heavy silence. The volunteers stood together, the weight of what was to come sinking in. They had faced challenges before, but this was different. This wasn't just about surviving. It was about proving the strength of their emotional connections, the very thing that made them human. That night, as the volunteers gathered in their quarters, each of them reflected on what was about to happen. They knew that the test would be difficult, emotionally draining, even, but they also knew that they couldn't back down now. This wasn't just about their future as individuals. This was about humanity's future. They had to show the Zorvani that the strength of their relationships was something that couldn't be measured with data alone. The next morning, they gathered in the simulation chamber, ready to face whatever emotional tests the Zorvani had in store. As the door slid shut behind them, they locked eyes, silently reaffirming their commitment to one another. The simulation chamber was silent, its cold, metallic walls reflecting the nervous energy of the 5 humans inside. The door had slid shut behind them, and the hum of the machinery in the room was the only sound. The volunteers stood in a loose circle, their hearts pounding in their chests. They didn't know what awaited them, but they had to face it together. This was the test they had been warned about, the test that would determine whether their emotional connections were strong enough to prove their worth in the eyes of the Zorvani. David stood in the center of the group, trying to steady his breath. He looked at each of his teammates, Sam, who was always calm under pressure, Priya, who had an analytical mind but was deeply connected to her friends, Lena, who had an artistic soul and a quiet strength, and Marcus, whose charisma had helped the group through many difficult moments. They had become a family of sorts in the short time they had spent together. Now they needed to rely on that bond more than ever. The room around them shifted. The once cold and sterile environment began to change, transforming into a strange version of an Earth setting. It was an environment that seemed to capture the essence of their lives. In the blink of an eye, the volunteers found themselves standing in the middle of a bustling city street. The familiar sights of Earth, the busy sidewalks, the noise of passing cars, and the scent of fresh bread from a nearby bakery were all around them. But there was something off about it. The people walking past them had no faces, just vague silhouettes. They were moving, but they weren't truly alive. A voice suddenly echoed in the room. It was the voice of Princess Xyra, calm but filled with authority. Your test begins now. You will each experience a moment from your life, one that challenges the bond you share with one another. How you respond to these emotional trials will determine the outcome of this experiment. Remember, your relationships are being tested. Show me the depth of your connections. Before they could fully process what she had said, the scene around them shifted again, and each volunteer was placed in a new environment, a simulation that felt entirely real. David found himself in the middle of a small, cozy living room. His wife's voice echoed from the other room. But when he entered, the space was empty. There was no sign of her, only a note lying on the kitchen table. He read it aloud, his voice shaking. "I'm leaving. I can't do this anymore. I thought I could, but I can't. Goodbye." His heart dropped. The note felt too real, too familiar. His mind raced, trying to process the emotions that flooded him. Confusion, fear, loneliness. This was a memory, a painful memory from Earth. His wife had left him during a difficult time, and he had been devastated. But as the image of his wife began to fade, he realized something important. He wasn't alone anymore. He had his team. They had become his family in this strange world. He wasn't going to break under this challenge. He could rely on his bond with them, his emotional strength, to get through this. He reached out, mentally calling for the others. Almost immediately, Lena, Sam, Priya, and Marcus appeared beside him. They didn't say anything at first, but their presence was enough. It was a silent reminder that no matter how painful the memory, they had each other. "Are you okay?" Sam asked softly, placing a hand on David's shoulder. David nodded, his voice steadying. "Yeah, I'm okay. Thanks, all of you." "Let's keep going," Lena said, her voice determined. "We'll face this together." Meanwhile, Priya found herself in a different scenario. She was back at her childhood home, standing in front of her parents. Her mother's voice echoed, filled with disappointment. "You've always been the smart one, the perfect one, but you'll never be good enough for us." The words cut deep, a sharp reminder of the pressure she had felt growing up. She had always tried to meet her parents' expectations, but no matter what she did, it never seemed enough. The pain of those words had haunted her for years, but now, in this moment, she realized that she didn't need their approval. She had made her own path, and the bonds she had with the people around her were what truly mattered. Just as the emotional weight began to feel unbearable, Sam appeared beside her, his calm demeanor offering comfort. "You're enough, Priya," he said, his voice full of warmth. "You're not alone." With that simple reassurance, Priya felt a sense of peace wash over her. She knew, now more than ever, that the love and friendship she had found in this group were what would carry her forward. Lena, for her part, was standing in a quiet park, alone with her thoughts. She was holding a painting in her hands, one of her most cherished creations. The painting had always represented her sense of connection to the world around her. But now, the painting began to fade, and she felt a deep sense of loss. Her father's voice echoed through the space. "You're just wasting your time with this. You'll never make a real difference with your art." The criticism from her father had always stung, but as Lena stood there, she realized something important. Her art wasn't just about seeking validation from others. It was a way for her to express her emotions, her truth. She had already made a difference, not just with her paintings, but with the way she had impacted the lives of those around her. Your art matters. Marcus's voice broke through the noise, and Lena turned to find him standing beside her. It matters to all of us. It helps us see the world in a way we couldn't otherwise. Lena smiled, grateful for his words. Thank you, Marcus. The group moved forward together, each facing their emotional trials with newfound strength. It wasn't just the memories that tested them. It was their ability to lean on one another, to remind each other of the bonds they had built. In the end, the volunteers realized that the test wasn't about defeating their pasts or erasing their pain. It was about showing the Zorvani that even in the face of hardship, they could rely on each other's strength. The connections they had formed were more than just biological. They were emotional, deep, and unbreakable. As the simulation chamber began to fade, the volunteers stood together, stronger than ever. They had proven something important, not just to the Zorvani, but to themselves. They weren't just surviving in this alien world, they were thriving. And that, they realized, was the true measure of their strength. The simulation chamber faded into a calm, silent space. The bright artificial lights above the volunteers dimmed, and the warm hum of machinery slowly subsided. The surroundings were gone, and the 5 humans stood together, a little shaken but stronger than before. They were still in the Zorvani habitat, but now they had crossed a threshold, one that had tested their emotional bonds, their humanity, and their strength. Princess Zyra appeared on the large screen before them, her silver eyes focused, her expression unreadable. The advisors stood behind her, observing intently. The tension in the room was palpable. The volunteers had faced their emotional trials, confronting painful memories, fears, and doubts. But the question remained: had they passed? Had they proven the depth of their connections? You have completed the test, Princess Zyra's voice echoed in the chamber. I have seen your responses, your resilience, your strength. I must admit, I did not expect what I witnessed. David, who had taken the lead throughout the experiment, stepped forward. His heart was still racing, and he wasn't sure what to expect. What do you mean, Your Highness? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The princess's gaze softened, just for a moment. I mean that I have seen something I did not think was possible, something beyond biological function and efficiency. Your species, you are more than what we assumed. You are more than just creatures driven by survival. Your emotional bonds, your connections, they are real. They are powerful. The words hung in the air like a weight lifting from their shoulders. For the first time in this entire experience, the volunteers felt a sense of pride. They had done it. They had shown the Zorvani that humanity wasn't just a species defined by biology, but one that thrived on connection, love, and shared experiences. Lena, who had been quiet through much of the test, smiled softly, her heart swelling with relief. We told you, she said, her voice quiet but sure. We are more than what you can measure. Princess Zyra nodded, her expression changing ever so slightly. You were right, she said, her voice thoughtful. I see now that emotions, love, friendship, even grief, are not weaknesses. They are what make you strong. And I have learned something valuable. Priya, always the one to analyze things from every angle, spoke next. We told you that humanity's bonds are not just biological. They are emotional, and they evolve. We grow, we learn, and we connect in ways that cannot always be explained with logic. The Zorvani princess paused, as if considering Priya's words carefully. You are a species of contradictions, she said at last, with a trace of admiration. You are capable of great strength, but also great vulnerability. You are driven by emotions, but your emotions are what allow you to survive and thrive. It is both your greatest asset and your greatest challenge. Marcus, who had always been the group's voice of encouragement, smiled. But it's what makes us human, Princess. It's what sets us apart from the rest of the galaxy. Zyra's eyes glinted with something that might have been respect. Indeed, and I now understand why your species has survived, grown, and created so much despite all the challenges you faced. You are not just surviving, you are living. The Zorveni advisors exchanged looks, their previous skepticism now replaced with quiet admiration. The princess turned back to the volunteers, her voice steady. I will report my findings to the council. Your species has earned my respect, and the respect of the Zorvani. You have proven that emotions are not simply a weakness, as we once believed. They are a force to be reckoned with. David felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The tension that had held him tight since the start of the experiment was finally beginning to fade. The Zorvani had seen humanity not just as a curiosity to study, but as something worthy of respect. It wasn't just about their ability to reproduce year-round or adapt to alien environments. It was about what they could offer the galaxy in terms of connection, empathy, and emotional depth. Thank you, Princess, David said, his voice filled with gratitude. We've learned a lot from this experience, too. We've learned that we're capable of far more than we thought. And maybe, just maybe, the galaxy will learn from us as well. Syra's expression softened, a rare hint of warmth in her gaze. You are welcome, Ambassador. It seems there is still much to learn from each other. The chamber grew quiet for a moment, the volunteers standing together, reflecting on the journey they had been through. It had started as an experiment, a way to prove that humanity could endure. But it had turned into something much more. It had turned into a testament to the power of human connection. As the group left the chamber, they were met with the sight of the Zorvani delegation standing nearby, no longer watching with the same detached curiosity, but with a newfound respect. The path ahead was unclear, but the volunteers now understood one thing. They had not only proven humanity's strength to the Zorvani, they had proven it to themselves. The stars outside the windows of the Zorvani habitat seemed to shine a little brighter that evening. The universe, once vast and unknown, now felt just a little bit smaller. The volunteers had shown the galaxy that love, friendship, and emotional bonds were what made humanity unique, and that, they knew, was a lesson worth sharing with the rest of the stars. And so, as they stood together, looking out at the galaxy beyond, the future seemed a little brighter, filled with possibilities, for they had shown the universe that the strength of humanity could never be measured by logic alone. It was measured by the heart.